We begin with breaking news tonight. Police arrested a Centerline man accused of killing his wife. Ryan, the Sky Chopper was over the scene as police went door to door looking for that suspect, with the neighborhood now on edge. Good evening and thank you for joining us. I'm Terrence Friday.
And I'm Shayna Humphrey.
March 17th, 2026. It was still early in the evening in Central Line, Michigan, when everything inside that home changed. A loud gunshot rang out. Sudden, sharp, impossible to mistake. Inside the house, children were there, close enough to hear it, close enough to know something was wrong, even if they didn't fully understand what had just happened. Then silence. The kind that follows something irreversible. In those few seconds, a normal day ended, and a family's life split into before and after. But here's what makes this case different. He told everyone what he was going to do. It was right there on his Facebook page for everyone to see, post after post for nearly a month. Heavier, darker, until the last one, going out with a bang. A few words that didn't seem urgent at first, but carried a meaning no one around him fully understood. Not yet. And by the time anyone realized what those words were pointing to, it was already too late, which made this case impossible to ignore. Before we go further, make sure you subscribe, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I always want to see how far these stories reach. Erica Sanders was 38 years old, a mother of 4 whose life was centered around the people who depended on her most. To those closest to her, she wasn't defined by headlines or tragedy. She was defined by her role in her children's lives. Everything she did, every decision she made, was tied to them in some way. Being a mother wasn't just part of her identity, it was the core of it. Raising 4 children comes with a level of responsibility that shapes your entire routine. It means early mornings, constant movement, and putting others before yourself more times than you can count. It means balancing discipline with care, making sure your children feel supported, while also preparing them for the world outside the home. That was the kind of life Erica was living. Her days were built around structure, taking care of her children, managing the household, and handling the everyday demands that don't stop, no matter what else is going on. It wasn't always easy, but it was consistent. And consistency is what gives children a sense of stability. For Erica, that stability mattered. She wasn't someone detached from her family, she was present, involved. The kind of parent who understood that even small moments, conversations, shared time, attention, shape how children grow and how they see the world. There's something else about mothers like Erica that often goes unnoticed. They carry the weight of everything quietly. The pressure to provide, the need to protect, the responsibility to hold things together, even when life isn't perfectly aligned. And despite that weight, they keep going, because stopping isn't an option when people rely on you. That was her reality. And within that reality, she was building something. Not necessarily something grand or visible from the outside, but something meaningful. A life where her children had what they needed. A home where they could feel secure. A future that, even if uncertain, was being worked toward every single day. That kind of effort doesn't always get recognized. But it matters. Because when a person like that is suddenly gone, it leaves a gap that can't be easily filled, not just emotionally, but structurally. And the people who depended on that stability are left trying to adjust to something they were never meant to face. For Erica's children, that loss wasn't abstract. It was immediate. It was personal. It was the absence of someone who had been at the center of their lives. And for the people who knew her, the loss carried a deeper weight, because they understood who she was beyond the surface. They knew the effort she put into her family. They knew the role she played in keeping things together. That's what makes this story more than just a case. It's about a woman who was living her life in a way that mattered to the people around her. Someone who was present, involved, and committed to her responsibilities. And then, in a single moment, all of that was taken. Erica wasn't living alone. Sharing that home with her was her boyfriend, Zachary Fuqua, a man who had become part of her daily life, part of her environment, and part of the space her children were growing up in. At one point, that relationship likely felt like something stable. Living together usually comes with a level of trust, a sense that both people are building something under the same roof. But over time, things between them began to shift. The connection didn't hold the same balance. There were tensions, ones that didn't just appear once and disappear. They lingered. They repeated. They grew. Arguments became part of the rhythm inside that home. Not always loud or constant, but present enough to change the atmosphere. For Erica and Zachary, there were signs that things weren't steady. Living together meant there was no real distance, no space to step away when tension rose. And when two people are in that kind of environment, unresolved issues don't fade easily. They stay close, they resurface, they push against each other until something gives. From the outside, relationships like this can look complicated, but not necessarily dangerous. People argue. People go through difficult periods. That's not unusual. But there's a difference between conflict that resolves and conflict that keeps returning without resolution. And that difference matters. Because when emotions are left unchecked, they don't stay the same. They intensify. There are also moments within these kinds of relationships where the tone shifts quickly, where something that starts as a conversation turns into something sharper. Not necessarily physical at first, but emotionally charged. Short exchanges that carry weight. Fragments of interaction that hint at something deeper. You always do this. You don't listen. This isn't working. Statements like that don't always seem significant in isolation. But when they repeat, when they become part of a pattern, they signal something that isn't resolving. They signal pressure. And pressure, when it builds without release, doesn't disappear on its own. It reaches a point. For Erica and Zachary, that point was getting closer. And by the time March 17 arrived, it was no longer just tension. This wasn't just another argument. It was building toward something worse. Hours before the shooting, there was a message. It didn't come in the form of a phone call or a private warning. It wasn't something whispered to a single person. It was posted on Facebook openly, where anyone connected to him could see it. Going out with a bang. At first glance, it could have been interpreted in different ways. Social media is full of statements that sound dramatic, exaggerated, or emotional in the moment. People post things without always meaning them literally. And because of that, messages like this don't always raise immediate concern. But context matters. And timing matters even more. This wasn't posted days before. It wasn't buried in old activity that no one would notice. It was recent, close enough to what would happen next that it couldn't be ignored once everything came to light. That's what makes it stand out. Because once the shooting happened, those words didn't feel vague anymore. They felt specific. Looking back, the question becomes unavoidable. Was it a warning, or was it a declaration? That distinction matters, because it speaks to intent. A message like that, posted publicly, suggests a mindset that had already reached a certain point. It suggests that whatever was about to happen wasn't entirely spontaneous. It had already been thought about, at least to some degree. Statements that sound alarming can be dismissed as emotional expression. People assume it's frustration, anger, something temporary that will pass once the moment settles, because taking it seriously means confronting the possibility that something real could happen. And most people don't want to believe that. But this is where the connection begins to form, between words and actions, between what was said and what followed. Because when you place that post alongside what happened later that evening, it no longer feels disconnected. It feels like part of the same sequence. A lead-in, a signal. Something that pointed toward what was about to happen, but wasn't understood in time. And that's what makes this part of the story so unsettling. Not just that the message existed, but that it was visible, accessible, right there, in plain sight. And still, whatever it meant wasn't acted on. By the time the meaning became clear, the moment had already passed. Because those words didn't stay online as just another post. They became something else entirely. The day began like any other day inside that home. Inside the house, Erica was there with her children. 3 of them were present that evening. Close enough to hear what happened. Close enough to be affected by it in a way that doesn't fade quickly. That alone changes the weight of everything that follows. Because this wasn't a private moment between 2 people. It was a situation unfolding in a space shared with children, where safety should have been a given. At some point during that day, tension inside the home reached a breaking point. The relationship between Erica and Zachary had already shown signs of strain, and on that day whatever had been building didn't settle. It escalated. The exact details of what was said in those moments aren't fully known, but what is clear is that the situation did not resolve peacefully. There was no cooling down, no separation that created distance between them. Instead, things moved in the opposite direction, and that's often how escalation works. For Erica, that moment came inside her own home, a place that should have been secure, a place where her children were present. That contrast is what makes this part of the story so difficult to process, because nothing about that environment suggested what was about to happen. There were no outside threats, no strangers involved, just a familiar setting, and a situation that had been building beneath the surface. And then within that space, something irreversible occurred. The kind of moment that doesn't give time for reflection or adjustment, the kind that shifts everything instantly, from routine to crisis, from normal to permanent loss. And for the children inside that home, the transition wasn't gradual, it was immediate. One second they were in a space that felt like home. The next, they were in a situation they would carry with them long after that day ended. That's what makes this moment so important in understanding the case, because it shows how quickly things can change, how a situation that may seem contained can reach a point where there's no time left to step back. No time left to rethink what's happening. No time left to stop what's already in motion. And when that point is reached, everything happens at once. Then, in a matter of seconds, everything changed, and then a gunshot, loud, immediate, final. It didn't take time to unfold. It didn't stretch into a long sequence of events. It happened quickly, in a matter of seconds, cutting through everything that existed in that home just moments before. Erica was shot in the back of the head. That detail alone tells you everything about how sudden and one-sided that moment was. There was no time for defense, no time to react, no opportunity to step away from what was happening. Just a single, irreversible action. For the children inside, the sound alone would have been enough to signal that something was wrong. But what followed would stay with them far longer than the noise itself. Because this wasn't something distant, it was happening where they lived, where they felt safe. And in that instant, that sense of safety was gone. Only silence. After the shot, the environment changed completely. What had been a home filled with routine became a space defined by shock. The normal structure of the day disappeared instantly, replaced by confusion, fear, and a reality that no one inside that house had been prepared for. And in that moment, Erica was no longer part of that space in the way she had been just seconds earlier. Everything she represented in that home, her presence, her role as a mother, the stability she provided, was gone in an instant. What makes this even more difficult to process is what happened immediately after. There was no visible pause that reflected the weight of what had just taken place. No moment that suggested hesitation or shock from the person responsible. Instead, the sequence of events continued. And that continuation adds another layer to the situation. One that shifts it from a moment of violence to something even more unsettling. Because actions taken right after a crime often reveal just as much as the act itself. But in that immediate moment, inside that house, none of that mattered yet. What mattered was the reality that had just been created. A mother gone. Children left in a situation no one should ever experience. And a home that would never feel the same again. Emergency response would come. The situation would move forward, the investigation would begin. But none of that changes what happened in those few seconds, because once that moment passed, there was no way to reverse it, no way to return to what existed before. And despite everything that followed, despite any effort made afterward, there was one outcome that could not be changed. She didn't survive. Zachary Fuqua didn't stay frozen, he didn't immediately break down. According to prosecutors, after shooting Erica, he interacted with the children. And what he did next stood out in a way that's hard to ignore. He gave them candy. Think about that for a second. Just moments after taking their mother's life, he turned to the children in that same space and handed them something small, something ordinary, something that in any other situation would feel harmless. Candy. That contrast is what makes this moment so disturbing, because it doesn't align with what people expect after an act like that. There's a disconnect between the severity of what just happened and the calm, almost routine nature of what followed. It creates a question that doesn't have an easy answer. How does someone move from that level of violence to that level of normal behavior in seconds? There's no clear transition, no visible break between those two actions. Just a continuation, as if one moment didn't fully interrupt the next. And for the children, that moment becomes even more complex. Because they weren't just present during the incident, they were now interacting with the same person responsible for it, in a way that didn't match what had just happened. That kind of contradiction leaves a lasting impact. It confuses the mind. It blurs the line between safety and danger, and it adds another layer to the emotional weight of the situation. But it didn't end there. After that brief interaction, he left. He didn't stay at the scene. He didn't wait for authorities to arrive. He fled. That decision introduces another important element: awareness. Because leaving after something like this suggests a recognition of what has just occurred. It shows that this wasn't a moment that passed unnoticed, or something that could be explained away in real time. It was followed by action. Movement away from the scene, distance from what had just taken place, and that movement would eventually lead to his arrest. But in that immediate window, those moments right after the shooting, what stands out most isn't just the violence. It's the behavior that followed it, the calmness, the contradiction, the shift from one extreme to another without hesitation. And that's what makes this part of the story so difficult to process, because it forces you to look beyond the act itself and into the mindset behind it. Now I want to hear from you. What do you think really led to this? Do you believe this could have been prevented? Or was this always going to happen? Let me know in the comments, because what he did next made the situation even more disturbing. After leaving the house, Zachary Fuqua created distance between himself and what had just happened. He didn't remain at the scene. He didn't wait for emergency responders. Instead, he left, moving away from the home where everything had just changed in a matter of seconds. That decision marked a clear shift. Once authorities were alerted, the focus moved quickly. What began as a chaotic scene inside the home turned into an active search outside of it. Information was shared, locations were checked, and efforts were made to track his movement as quickly as possible. Because at that point, it wasn't just about understanding what had happened. It was about finding him. Law enforcement treated the situation with urgency. When someone leaves the scene of a violent crime, every minute matters. The goal becomes clear: locate, contain, and bring the situation under control before anything else can happen. And in this case, that response led to results. Zachary Fuqua was located not far from the area. He hadn't made it across state lines or disappeared into a distant location. He was found nearby, within reach, and taken into custody. That moment marked another transition in the case. Once in custody, the process shifted again. Now it wasn't about searching, it was about formally addressing what had taken place. Charges were filed, reflecting the seriousness of the crime. He was accused of second-degree murder, along with additional weapons-related offenses tied to the shooting. From a law enforcement perspective, this is where structure replaces chaos. The scene is secured, statements are taken, evidence is gathered, and the focus moves toward building the case. When the immediate response ended and the scene was cleared, what remained wasn't just the memory of what happened inside that home, it was the reality that followed it. For Erica's 4 children, that reality changed everything. They weren't hearing about this from a distance. They weren't learning about it through someone else's experience. They were there, inside the same space, close enough to understand that something had gone terribly wrong, even if they couldn't fully process it in that moment. And that kind of experience doesn't fade quickly, because it doesn't just affect one day, it carries forward into everything that comes after. The absence of a parent reshapes a child's world in ways that aren't always visible right away. It shows up in the quiet moments, in routines that feel different, in the realization that someone who was always there is no longer coming back. For them, Erica wasn't just a name in a story, she was their mother, the person who provided structure, care, and consistency in their lives. The one they turned to, relied on, and expected to be there the next day, and the day after that. Now that expectation is gone. and what replaces it is something much harder to navigate. For the rest of her family, the weight of that loss is just as heavy. Grief in situations like this doesn't come in a simple form. It's not only about losing someone, it's about how that loss happened. The suddenness, the violence, the fact that it occurred in a place that should have been safe. Those details don't disappear. They stay with people. They shape how the loss is remembered. And they leave behind questions that don't always have clear answers. Why did it reach this point? Could something have changed the outcome? Was there a moment where things could have been stopped? These are the kinds of questions that don't fade easily, because they're tied to the idea that something might have been different. The community felt it too. Incidents like this don't remain contained within one home. They extend outward, affecting the people who live nearby, the ones who hear about it, and the ones who begin to reflect on how something like this can happen in a familiar environment. It creates a shift, a sense that what feels normal isn't always as secure as it seems. And that awareness stays with people, because it forces them to look at everyday situations differently, to understand that danger doesn't always come from outside. Sometimes it exists within spaces people trust. At the center of all of this is a simple but difficult truth. Erica Sanders' life didn't just end. It was taken. And what she left behind wasn't just memories. It was a space that can't be filled in the same way again. For her children, for her family, for everyone who knew her. This wasn't just a case. It was a family shattered. What makes this case stay with people isn't just what happened. It's what it reveals about the kind of situations many overlook. Because at the center of this story is a difficult truth. Not every relationship that looks familiar is safe. There's a difference between love and control, but that difference isn't always obvious in real time. It doesn't always come with clear labels. Sometimes it shows up in small ways. Tension that keeps returning, arguments that never fully settle, reactions that feel stronger each time they happen. And when those patterns repeat without resolution, they don't stay the same. They grow. What may start as disagreement can turn into something more intense. What feels manageable at one point can reach a level where it's no longer stable. And the danger in that progression is that it often goes unnoticed until it has already reached a critical point. That's one of the key lessons here. Not all warning signs are taken seriously, especially when they come from people we already know. There's a natural tendency to assume that familiarity equals understanding, and that understanding equals safety. But that isn't always true. In many cases, the people closest to a situation are the ones most exposed to risk. Not because they expect harm, but because they don't always see how far something can escalate. Another important part of this is how conflict is handled. Unresolved tension doesn't disappear on its own. It doesn't fade simply because time passes. If anything, it builds. It adds pressure to the situation until something eventually gives. And when that happens suddenly, there's no time left to correct it. That's why small signs matter. Moments that feel off, reactions that don't align with the situation, patterns that repeat without improvement. These things can seem minor when viewed individually, but together, they can point to something much more serious. Ignoring them doesn't reduce the risk, it only delays the response. Erica's story shows how quickly things can move from unstable to irreversible, how a familiar environment can shift in seconds, and how the outcome is often shaped by everything that came before it. Understanding that pattern is where awareness begins, and awareness is what gives people the chance to act before it's too late. In the end, it comes back to a single moment: a home, a gunshot, and a message posted hours earlier that no one fully understood at the time. Erica Sanders was 38 years old, a mother of 4, someone who was present in her children's lives, who carried the responsibility of holding things together, who was living a life that, despite its challenges, still had direction. And in an instant, that life was taken. What remains now are the people she left behind. 4 children who will grow up carrying the absence of someone who should still be here. A family adjusting to a reality they never expected. And a story that didn't have to end this way. Because the signs were there, the tension was there, and even the words, going out with a bang, were there before everything changed. But understanding came too late. If this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe. And tell me, what would you have done if you were in her position?